Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session of Community Office Hours. We have a bunch of Influxers on the line who can help answer questions. So if you have any questions you have about Influx or any of our tools, this is definitely your time to ask. And we also will have a quick presentation by Samantha Wang, who is on our product management team.
Hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Is it working? Okay, hold on. There it is. Sorry. Hold on.
Apologies, everyone. Just give us one moment.
Okay, so yeah, sorry about that. We'll just kind of go through some of the new updates. We released Telegraph 1.13 last Thursday. So you can go ahead and go online and download the updates, and I'll just talk through some of the new features that came in this update. So we had a series of six new plugins that were part of Telegraph 1.13. One of them, the first one was Azure Storage Queues that allows you to measure the size of your Microsoft Azure storage queues, and also view the oldest message if you configure it to do so. We have an ETH tool plugin that allows you to view your Ethernet device stats on your Linux machine. SNMP trap tool as well that receives SNMP locations, traps and information requests, and versioning. All the metrics are on there on the GitHub README. A Suricata plugin. These are actually internal performance metrics of Suricata. So just making sure your Suricata is up and running, up and performing, and performing how you would want it to you expect it to be doing, and make sure it's not down for security purposes. A SYN proxy plugin as well. This is also a Linux module used to view SYN attack mitigation, and a systemd units plugin as well to gather systemd metrics. And two actually pretty useful processors and aggregator. One processor, one aggregator to help you modify your data through Telegraph before it enters into the database. One of them is a cloning processor, which essentially just copies every metric that's passing through, and you're able to maintain the original metric. And a merge aggregator as well, which will merge the metrics if you have the same measurement, timestamp, and tag, and that all of those are the same and you have different fields for them, all on different lines, then the merge aggregator will merge them all into one single line protocol. So this is really helps with data efficiency from a data efficiency perspective on kind of keeping your storage, keeping your data efficient. And other notes is that all these were built with Go 1.13.3, and there's also some other, just a lot of bug fixes and feature builds that you can all view in our changelog. So all of those are out there, and feel free to download it and take a look.
All right, thank you, Samantha. So just a quick update on TimeSeries meetups. So TimeSeries meetups are events and groups that we sponsor around the world. And we just love to get anyone who's interested in TimeSeries data to come and meet and just chat about how they're using various TimeSeries data tools and learn from each other. While it is sponsored by Influx Data, it is not an InfluxDB sales pitch. We have lots of different community members present on them, so we're always looking for new presenters. And if you just want to share your story or do whatever, we're more than happy to work with you if you want to present at one of these. So we have a meetup here in San Francisco. It's at Influx Data's office. It's really centrally located right on Market Street. And we also have an event coming up in Paris on January 21st. And we also have a TimeSeries meetup coming up in Estonia on January 26th. Just a little bit of a recap. So we have our community forum, and it's a really great place for any InfluxDB users to go in and find answers to questions, submit support questions, share ideas with other InfluxDB users. And we are active in there. We have so many different community users who are active in there as well. We also have our InfluxDB Slack. So if you just go to influxdata.com/Slack, you can join the Slack workspace for our community. There are so many different channels in there, and we are all in there helping each other out, answering questions. So feel free to go in there, poke around, check out all the different channels. If you see the little Influx Data logo next to someone's name, that probably means that they are an internal Influx Data person. So we're all in there trying to help you guys out. And of course, you can answer each other's questions as well. We also have our InfluxDB subreddit. While it isn't that active, we're still there for those who are on Reddit. I actually recently spoke to someone who found InfluxDB through a subreddit. So there's definitely good information out there as well. Just to go into a few community resources, we have our showcase, which is a really centralized area for community users to go. We have a ton of information there for you. We'll list upcoming events, where Influxers are going to be. Maybe they're going to be presenting on a webinar. We also have webinars with InfluxDB users, and we also feature articles from the community. So if you post an article somewhere about how you're using InfluxDB, we can link it here so everyone else can find it. And you can also find out more information about our TimeSeries meetups, as well as our Influx ACES program. For those who don't know, the Influx ACES are people within the community who have been nominated, who are total InfluxDB rock stars and who really know their stuff. So we have these community office hours every month, where you guys can come in and ask questions to a panel of our Influxers and get these questions answered in real time. This session is being recorded, and we will post it to YouTube afterwards. So it looks like there is one question. So Leon has asked, I'd like to know if InfluxDB are aware of the Stack organization that benchmarks databases. So I will leave it to our awesome panel to answer this.
I took some time just to look into that right now. It seems like it's a tool that's specific to financial tick databases. We have not done any kind of work with that, to my knowledge. We do have some customers who are in the financial space that do use the data for that, but we haven't collaborated with that organization to do a formal benchmark.
Perfect, thank you. I hope that answers your question.
We do a lot of internal benchmarking as well. And so there's some blog posts by Chris Trulio that you can find on our blog where she does a lot of benchmarking against competition, if that's important to Leon. And obviously we do pretty well there because we want to keep those benchmarks looking good for sales pitches. But also because we're awesome. I don't know if you guys knew that we're awesome. I just want to put that in there.
Thanks, Jacob. And we do use DB engines for benchmarking and looking at how we're doing in the marketplace against all different databases, as well as time series specific databases. Can I set up a discussion between the two groups? Leon, are you talking about between DB engines as well as Stack? I'm going to actually unmute you, so it might be easier this way. All right, I believe you can unmute yourself now.
Hi there, can you hear me?
There's some feedback.
Yeah.
But yes,
okay.
we can hear you.
Great. Okay. So I do come from a financial services firm. I work at Goldman Sachs. And we are starting out on our journey on InfluxDB. And part of the use case that we see for this is around having the database serve as an alerting platform. It's not just collecting the data for like in analysis, but driving real-time alerting off the back of it. So to us, the benchmarking about the ability of the database to ingest and still stream out values and keep up with that rate is really, really important to us because we need to alert real time in the event of issues going wrong. So Stack Group basically are the organization in financial services for benchmarking software and hardware technology. So we look to them to say, what should a database be capable of doing under various different kind of VM configurations, bare metal configurations, and so on. So they weren't really interacting with InfluxDB because I guess the two of you haven't really hooked up. And as you point out on dbengines.com, InfluxDB is quite big in terms of market share compared with even the number 2 slot. So to date, Stack haven't really worked with you. And I think from the point of view of my business, getting those benchmarks from Stack would be big, but from your point of view, getting the product in front of more financial customers by having your benchmarks there would be great for InfluxDB.
Thank you, Leon. That's some really great insight. Appreciate you sharing that with us. Do you have any other questions for us?
So I've kind of been in contact with the founder of Stack. I guess who can I set him in contact with InfluxDB to see if the two of you can participate? If you already have a benchmarking team, for example, then I'm sure the two of those groups would get on really, really well, and we could both move forward with getting some of these metrics out. So if you could supply a contact name, maybe offline or something to me, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy. So this is Caitlin Croft. I'm happy to reach out to you and we can figure out something and figure out what we can do.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, of course. Anything else? Does the panel maybe have anything they'd like to share about InfluxDB in financial services space that might be helpful to Leon?
I guess one thing I could ask is maybe a little bit more detail. What is it that you are doing at Goldman Sachs exactly? Like what are you guys monitoring? What kind of things do you want to alert on? Just to get a little bit more background maybe into your use case.
So I'm responsible for running our equities trading systems. And off the back of that, we're ingesting telemetry from those different trading systems into an InfluxDB. At the moment, it's just kind of used for informational purposes, right? But a lot of that data, for example, if there were events that indicate failures on the platform, or the data rates have reached the kind of the capacity that, or are nearing the capacity of the system to handle, then that's the kind of thing that a continuous query based on InfluxDB can be sitting there listening for, and like send out a pager message, for example, that somebody needs to react to this immediately.
These application. Sorry, continue.
And then basically, the kind of the low rates we're currently ingesting, I think that would be quite an easy thing for InfluxDB to do, right? But there are people who question whether the database should be on the critical path, whether should we build alerting directly out of the applications and not really use InfluxDB for that. So low rates of ingestion, I'm certain InfluxDB can keep up on the continuous query space. What I don't have and don't really have time to do is to benchmark and say, you know what, on this kind of size of VM with an ingestion rate of maybe like 1 million metrics per second, I will be able to sustain X number of continuous queries with a maximum delay of 500 milliseconds, as an example. But going above that, maybe to 1.1 million, would slow that rate down, and maybe I'm going to start to see delays up to, say, 5 seconds. Maybe at 1.2 million, the thing just falls over. So knowing what that upper bound is and what the degradation looks like would allow me to go back to the kind of the detractors of using InfluxDB in this alerting path and say, these are benchmarks in the organization we know and trust. We actually fund part of staff to go and benchmark, as many of the financial organizations do. So with that, knowing these benchmarks and what we've actually assigned and allocated hardware-wise, I disagree, and we could do our alerting based off InfluxDB based upon this benchmarking.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great. Are you in touch with anybody from our sales team at all yet?
I have had some contact in the past from various different people. So I kind of don't really know who specific to go to. Right now we are using the community edition. And again, based off not having made a decision whether to use it for alerting or not, it's a bit hard to get funding. So yeah, benchmarking might help on that kind of decision making.
Yeah, certainly. I would definitely encourage, let's just try to get a dialogue between the two of you going, because even knowing about Stack, and I'm sure they'll have even more context about that. And, you know, in the interim, while we're kind of working things out, we could probably get you some kind of preliminary benchmarks that you could even potentially run yourself.
Right.
And so just going back to your use case here a little bit more, is this, so you run the equities trading platform, is that correct?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And so are these kind of like system level metrics that you're pulling off from the VMs, or are these like application style level metrics?
Everything from the bottom upwards, basically. So it's both cases.
And then what types of things do you alert on? Like what are kind of the things that you view as like mission critical?
There's a lot of potential metrics you would want to be observing. So there's not one particular thing that is the most important. The kind of the speed that our system runs at is important to us, right? So if there are suddenly delays on the network, like I mentioned before, if we're running into capacity issues, whether that be, you know, around memory, compute, or with literally the ability of the application to handle a certain amount of order flow. So there's a lot of different things. Some of them more the infrastructure level, some of the application level.
And are you imagining that this is just going to be a tool for handling, like, so capturing the metrics and then triggering alerts, or do you want to run any kind of like ad hoc queries to do analysis of the data, or do you have like dashboards that you're going to be making from any of this data, or is this like purely for the alerting aspect?
Yeah, well, so I think in terms of protecting such a platform, you can stream, right? So you can have one database perhaps that ingests everything and serves as the alerting platform. and then also maybe dual write to a second database, which is for, like you
Certainly.
say, more for the ad hoc querying, and that kind of protects your alerting performance.
Yep. Yeah, totally. I was just trying to grasp it there a little bit. Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I know that we have a number of other firms doing similar types of things. It would be really great to get you in touch with the sales team. They'll be able to guide the story or to guide the kind of process with a little bit more detail than we can do here. But it sounds really interesting and like a really compelling use case to me.
Yeah, and if you have people doing benchmarks already, I've already primed Stack with the kind of scenarios that we're looking at. They already have built a lot of these benchmarks for example, one of your competing products. Maybe I think it's number 2 on the DB Engine's ranking. And really, I think they're just wondering when you guys are going to reach out to them to as number 1 in order to get yourself benchmarked using their benchmarks. So I think just maybe hooking the 2 of you up, kind of technical to technical team, rather than maybe going through the sales team, would be more productive. And then I think perhaps just wait for the results to come out.
Certainly. Yeah. I think that sounds really great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'll be in touch, Leon. We'll try to help on our side as well.
Thank you very much.
Of course. If there are no more questions, we'll just keep the lines open for another minute, and then we'll shut this down. It has been recorded and will be posted on YouTube shortly.
I have a question.
Sure.
Jacob, what's going on in the world of storage recently?
Oh, let's see. So yeah, I'm the tech lead on the storage team, and so we're responsible for making sure that bytes that are written land on disk and in a correct manner, and make sure that the bytes get read off of disk in the correct manner, and then thirdly, make sure that those 2 things happen in a performant fashion. So mostly low latency and not using too much memory. So that's kind of our mission on the storage team. Lately, we've been working on some things in Cloud 2.0. So as our customer base is growing in Cloud 2.0, we've experienced the usual growing pains along the way, and so there've been lots of little things going on in the storage engine lately, like again, performance issues and things like that. Was tracking an issue this morning where we were watched a series key do something funny, and got to the bottom of that. So we're excited for kind of the next year coming up. We've got some high ambitions and goals, but nothing to share publicly yet until the dust settles. Yeah. Michael? What team are you on now? Are you on compute?
Yeah. So I'm the engineering manager for the monitoring application team. So we handle the API pieces and the data layer, so things like connections to SCB and whatnot, as well as the user interface, formerly known as chronograph.
And how has chronograph changed in the last quarter?
Yeah, so the big things that we've been doing are trying to improve the Flux authoring experience in the browser. So, we used to have a thing called CodeMirror, which was a pretty naive kind of like text editing kind of box that you could type stuff into. But we got a lot of feedback from our customers that what we really want is like a more rich experience of typing out Flux or just kind of anything else that you would want to write in there. So things like static autocompletion, data autocompletion. So like if I'm typing F, I want to autocomplete to from, and then once I get into the inner part of the query, I want to be able to select from the databases by clicking or having those autocomplete as I type. So it's like common text editor features. So we've been focusing a lot on that, and we've been working on a way to make the monitoring and alerting feature that we have in 2.0 a little bit easier to consume for more advanced users. So we did a really standard kind of first pass of like the 80% use case, and now we're trying to drill down into the more kind of in-depth monitoring and alerting features. And so just kind of uncovering some things here and there. As well as we added the ability to configure Telegraph through the UI. It used to be a pretty rough, kind of like, again, that 80% beginner experience where it was really easy, but you couldn't configure details. We've been making it so that more advanced users can go in and kind of configure more specific things about their Telegraph config. So that's some of the things that we've been going on, as well as just a number of other kind of improvements to dashboarding and things like that.
Yeah, and just to add to Michael, I guess, since I work with him a lot, I guess a big thing, I think both of us, an objective we want with the UI is just to be able to do a lot of stuff that you previously weren't able to do, or that might be difficult for someone who's not a developer to do through the UI, like he mentioned Telegraph and flux querying and everything. So I think that's just a kind of an overall objective for us.
Anais, have you been seeing anything kind of interesting in the community happening recently? Anything maybe that kind of comes to mind, or maybe there's any kind of interesting experiences or conversations that you've had recently?
Kind of random, but today I just saw a community user using Influx in conjunction with Power BI, and I thought that was kind of unique because I haven't really seen that yet. Seeing a lot of people using Flux and taking advantage of the function or the ability to write functions. Like Scott's been doing an awesome job answering a lot of people's questions. And yeah, just like steadily people are like wrapping their heads around Flux and really starting to use it, which is cool.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, switching to Flux is a paradigm shift for sure.
It takes a second, but I feel like once you get the hang of it, then like it's way more readable. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is Scott. I've had my feet firmly planted in Flux land for a while now, and having to go back to InfluxQL is almost painful for me these days. Yeah, Flux is great. And Caitlin, there's a few things that rolled out with some recent releases that I could go over if you want me to take some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. We still have about 30 minutes if you'd like to run with it.
Cool. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And
Yep, absolutely. Go for it.
I just need someone to stop sharing. I don't know whose screen is being shared right now, but I can't take it over until perfect. There we go. So there's been a few new Flux functions that have been introduced, but one that I think is pretty cool is it's an experimental function. It allows you to scrape Prometheus metrics from any HTTP endpoint that is formatted as Prometheus metrics. So with this being an experimental function, there's some risks right now involved with using it, and it really just has to do that at some point this is going to be promoted into the standard library, and when it gets promoted, how you use that function is going to change. That's really the only major risk. But what this does again is it allows you to pull Prometheus metrics from any HTTP endpoint. So I'm running Alpha 21 locally, InfluxDB 2.0 Alpha 21, the OSS version locally, and this is just a preview of the metrics endpoint for InfluxDB 2, and it just outputs all of the internal InfluxDB metrics formatted as Prometheus metrics. So we can actually use the experimental Prometheus function. So I need to import the experimental Prometheus package and then use the Prometheus scrape function to pull the metrics from this endpoint. Now, the cool thing about this is you can then write it back into InfluxDB. So each time I submit this query, it's going to scrape the metrics from that specific moment in time from that endpoint, and then write them back into InfluxDB. And just to show that it is writing back, I'll just visualize the metrics that have come back. So I might increase my time range. There are metrics there. They aren't being visualized right now just because of the way the data is structured. But yeah, you can scrape any Prometheus formatted metrics that are available at an HTTP endpoint. Another cool function that is somewhat of a preview for what's coming down the pipe is with the new Alpha 21 Influx CLI. There's a new command called transpile that will transpile an InfluxQL query into Flux. This is again laying the foundation for the Influx transpiler that will be released with InfluxDB 2.0. So if you're a user who loves InfluxQL and isn't quite ready to make the jump to Flux, you'll still be able to pull all your InfluxQL workloads into 2.0, enable the transpiler, and as those queries are executed in the backend, they're transpiled into Flux. Flux generates a response and then feeds the response back up to whatever client you're using. So the transpile command, this uses the same transpile code. The biggest difference is there's no transpilation engine running in the background like there will be. This is just a one-off command. But here I'm selecting use percent from my Telegraph database, my autogen retention policy, and my mem measurement. And it returns a Flux script that will, or Flux query that will return the same results that the InfluxQL query would.
Awesome, that's really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. It's a little verbose for my taste, but it's hard to avoid when you automate things. But yeah, I'm excited for this one. I think it'll give people good visibility into exactly what's happening with the old InfluxQL workloads.
Definitely.
Go ahead.
Continue. No, please continue.
The last thing I was just gonna say is I was gonna plug the new Flux VS Code plugin, VS Flux, that it has a language server protocol that you can run inside of VS Code and get all of the niceties of an IDE with Flux, and also it'll give you a sense of what we're trying to do with the Flux user experience inside of the UI.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, so the same LSP that runs in this VS Code extension, and actually the same text editing engine, we've embedded into the UI. So we want to make sure that there's a pretty close parity between those two. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So I had one question, Scott and Anais. What was kind of like the aha moment that you had with Flux? Like when do you feel like you got it, and what do you think like that thing was?
For me personally, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick. But for me personally, it was running custom functions, but just the ability to extend Flux to meet my needs, so that I could never do with InfluxQL. Extending InfluxQL involved editing the source code almost, and you'd have to go that low level to develop custom functions, or you're doing something in an entirely different syntax and running it as a user-defined function in Capacitor. It was just really, really challenging to do anything custom to a specific use case, where in Flux, it's just the nature of a functional language of building custom functions and shaping the entire query and scripting flow to your specific needs. That's what I have come to love about it.
Anais, do you have?
I think I think for me, it really came together. I think writing custom functions, that's a great way to learn it. But I think my understanding really came together when I had to, as part of some functions, join time streams that had different time intervals. And so, because that's the hardest part for me with dealing with any time series data, is just wrapping my mind around the different times. So figuring out ways to join tables that have different time values, and the best way to do that for my data set. And then that kind of helped me like wrap my mind around the hardest part of Flux and TimeSeries, which is just dealing with the time component and figuring out where I am and how to split things up. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. Did you have any trouble with kind of getting used to the like table format that comes out of Flux? Because there's one thing I've noticed a little bit is our ingest format is kind of like row based, but our like the basic kind of query, like your standard kind of from range, right? When you get the data, comes back in this very like columnar kind of focus, where we've taken the fields and kind of pivoted them down into being a column rather than like a field name, right? Does that make any sense? Like we have a column called underscore field that contains all the fields, and a column called underscore value that contains the value, rather than having it be kind of like that row that we had originally.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it helps me to always include a group at the end of my Flux queries, just so I can collapse all the tables into one, because that's what makes sense to me more personally. But I think it being columnar really, like, it makes a lot of sense and it helps you manipulate it better. I'd also say if you're really trying to understand Flux, I feel like if you can use the pivot function and understand what that's doing, then you're probably good to go. Then I feel like you really understand what's happening. So
Yeah, I second the use of pivot. I think anybody coming from Influx 1.x, if you can wrap your head around the pivot function and pivot those fields into columns, the output will look a lot more like what you're used to in 1.x. I know for me, thinking back to when I was first looking at output data, I remember wishing that we had more support for output formats, where right now we only support annotated CSV. It would be awesome to have like JSON, or I don't know that we could just do straight CSV because the annotations are really important in Flux, but just options for output formats. And I've seen some requests for that in the API specifically, for the InfluxDB API. So Flux itself will always return annotated CSV, but I'm hoping, and I don't know the internals behind all this, but it'd be cool to be able to offer different formats. So we take what Flux returns and then convert it into something else before we return it to the client. I know one thing that confused me was the addition of the start and the stop columns, why they're there, what purpose they serve. They actually serve a really important purpose, especially when you begin windowing. And for anybody who's just getting introduced to Flux and you see those columns being added that don't actually exist in your database, they're being appended by the from function. As you start to group data into windows of time, those values will change and they'll be assigned based on whatever time window the specific record falls in. And as soon as you understand that, you can actually start to pretty in powerful ways manipulate how data gets structured, both by time and by tag and by field, etc. There's just understanding the columnar relationship between the data, where those start and stop values come from. You can do some really cool stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so a little bit of history about that as well. So when Influx first started out, InfluxDB in InfluxQL always, if you ever did like a group by time or anything like that, it would always choose the left hand. So it would choose the start value for any of the groupings. And then when we implemented capacitor, it would actually choose the stop value. And so there was always this kind of headache of like shifting your data around in capacitor to try to make it like if you had the InfluxQL timestamp match up with the tick script or capacitor timestamp. And so there's always kind of this shifting of timestamps to be either the left or the right. And so one of the insights that we had, right, is to include all of those values kind of on each record. So like you always include start, you always include stop, and you include time. And that way you give the user the flexibility to choose kind of the dimensions that they want to make sure are joined on. So yeah, that's a really great insight. And it kind of does seem a little bit arbitrary at first, but I think that one in particular is coming from a pain point that we had just kind of almost constantly in both InfluxQL and in Capacitor. So yeah, I was really excited to see that come as well. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I haven't yet seen it kind of materialize, is since we can in Flux make custom functions, I would really like to see kind of like higher order functions that we kind of have as libraries that we can give to users, right? So maybe like there's a telegraph package library where it's just like, I give the bucket that has telegraph data and I call like .cpu, and it gives me like all of the interesting kind of CPU things. Or maybe there's like specific package related queries where we can actually hide a lot of the complexity for like the average case user. So I'm really excited about that. And I know getting kind of user defined packages for Flux is something that's definitely on our radar that we want to get to. So I'm really excited about the place when we start to get to these higher order abstractions in Flux. I think there's going to be a lot of power there.